Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to my face and channel. So I wanted to do two things in this video for this Friday. They're a little different, but I have a big project that's going to be officially kind of like premiering or being announced, which is the podcast, and like getting a cast for that together and stuff like that. So I wanted to sort of wrap up Happy Camper and kind of give you an idea of what that gameplay looked like. So we just did an aftermath episode where we essentially did an epilogue. So we're going to talk about, or I'm going to literally read what that was. So I did like a whole breakdown of what happened during the season, the major big parts. And then have just a short conversation about what some takeaways were from that and what I want to kind of do moving forward for Happy Camper, which again is my horror 5e game that I originally designed to be a one-shot, specifically to be run in like Halloween season in 5e, but I was toying going between 5e and Call of Cthulhu. So the original game that I wrote was heavy on the Cthulhu with just 5e mechanics. The first season I ran was pretty like generic 5e, like adventure style, but heavy on the kind of creepy horror aesthetic. And then this one, I tried to make it even more 5e, but with just as much like creepy horror aesthetic. So I've just been trying out the different ratios of like horror and adventure in the last two seasons. And I will not be moving forward with the season 3, but I will be rebooting this to start a longer campaign. So I first want to talk about Happy Camper and do kind of like my wrap up for that. So the game, I had 4 players, and the game began as a nod to the first season, which only one of my players actually returned for. And so they were the only one that had actually played the first season, but we were technically going off of events that had happened in the first season. And then I kind of tried to have to apply them to the new players. That kind of worked, but kind of didn't work. And so I can talk a little bit about that. But essentially, the beginning of Happy Camper Season 2 begins 2 years after the first season. So the first season was all about campers going to a summer camp for a weekend. It was a weekend camp. They were supposed to be going to have fun, meet friends, all of the summer camp trope things. These were preteens to teenage kids. And they were supposed to go and have a great fun time, but it actually began to spiral into a nightmare. And that was the premise of the weekend camp. So for this new season, it turns out that I kind of like retconned that the Happy Camper camps, those weekend camps, they had done like 3 of those. They had done 3 weekends of those until they finally had like stopped because, children were like going missing and coming back like catatonic. It was not a good situation. But they were able to do 3 camps. So that tells you about the administration until they closed it down. But what we see when we come into the second season is that the camp is reopening those weekend camps. And saying things like, well, now it's better, children won't go missing. Okay. So that is where we kind of find our campers who survived the first camp and are now seeing an announcement that says that they are going to be reopening those camps and understanding the horror that new campers are going to go through. They are essentially recruited by a person who only goes by A. They're sent a letter, and that letter kind of just gives them a date, a time, and a place for them to all meet to discuss what the heck they're going to do about this camp reopening. One of the things that kind of jumps them into making the decision to meet, because they could have all just been like, I'm not worrying about it. I survived. I've been on the down low. I'm not going to get myself involved again, is before they get that letter, or I think it's the same day actually, they have been noticing a trend in obituaries in the newspaper. The obituaries have been showing that previous campers who have survived the weekend camps are showing up in the obituaries as dying for different reasons. This has obviously been alarming, but the main alarming camper that turns up in the obituary right before they get the letter from A is a character named Zoe. Now, Zoe was the camp counselor. It was kind of retconned for the players that didn't play season 1, but she was the camp counselor for all of the campers for all 3 weekends. She's sort of a camper that has been going to the clients' camps for a long time. She had a lot of knowledge. She was kind of an OP warrior character that if you befriended her, or if she, found you in a certain part of the story, she could come to your aid. And you could see that she wasn't a very likable person, but she was a very good ally to have. And she was very strong. And so it would have been difficult for her to get caught up because she had been kind of doing this for a long time, trying to figure out the reason why these camps were so deadly and so dangerous and fighting back. Zoe was the person that was doing that. And you know this from what you learned in the first camp. And so this is where I say that the retconning did really well for the one player that returned from the first season. But I think the weight of that was lost on the other players that were new. Because if you didn't play the first season, you didn't get to actually see Zoe in action. I just kind of told you that that's what happened. That was like the background. You didn't get to interact with her, really. You didn't actually get to see that. It would have been a huge surprise to see her in an obituary 2 years later. And so that's just something that I keep in the back of my GM brain for the next 2 seasons, or the next season that I'm going to be starting, or the reboot. Oh my gosh. Anyway, so that is where we start. They see that former campers who have survived are dying off or being killed off. They don't really know. They know that Zoe, who was a pretty powerful warrior at the time, she has just showed up in obituary. So this is all very worrying. So not only are they now like, well, we don't want more campers to have to go through what we went through, but they're also like, well, it seems like someone's coming for the surviving campers. So we kind of have to also care about our own skin. So they all go and they meet up with this mystery person. This is a person they've never met before. They don't even know what this person looks like. They assume that the person that they meet is the person they're supposed to meet because they're supposed to be getting some information so that they can figure this out. Now, one of the big points of the way that I treat the people, like the grown-ups or the administration in Happy Camper, is that they are very quick to use people, very quick to be like, this is what you have to do, this is what we're doing for you. Like, so what happens is when they get to the place and they meet this person gives them like a bunch of paperwork that's like has given them new identities. They tell them that, hey, you guys are now signed up to be camp counselors and you're going to go back to client's camp and you're going to find the campers, probably the campers that disappeared many years ago, and you're going to try and like save them by letting us know the location of like this lab that they're supposed to be held in. And they just say this to the players. There's no, would you guys mind help? No, it's more like, you are going to do this. This isn't a conversation. And that's very common. And it's supposed to be that way because it is supposed to kind of make the players like not even trust the people that are supposed to be like helping the situation. That was a big thing in the first season where they meet all of the adults who are the staff, and they don't seem to really seem to care. They do care, but they don't care like you would think. So like some of the staff are like, they understand that there's a problem, but they also don't do anything right away. There's a nurse that seems like really lovely and really beautiful and really has a beautiful soul, but she is also still kind of using them to do things that she can't do. You know what I mean? So it's a tenuous relationship between the players' characters and the staff or the adults that are giving them these charges, like giving them these responsibilities, because they know that they can't do them themselves because they'll be found out. Like the people who are doing this to the campers know the other adults or other players that are trying to stop them. So they're using the kids as an intermediary. And to be honest, it's a cultural norm, let's say, in this world, for if one of these kids were to fall, like like Zoe or people in the obituaries, that doesn't mean they would then be like, okay, well, maybe we should not involve these kids. Maybe we shouldn't try to bring them back to camp because they might die. They don't think that way. They think, well, now it's even more important that we get this done like right now so that no more kids get into the situation. And then the kids we put into a dangerous camp so that they can find out these secrets, they're kind of unfortunately expendable as long as they get the job done. So that's already the relationship that I kind of built in the first game, and I rebuilt in this game by introducing new characters that had the same mentality. So that's just a very important societal like issue that I kind of put into the game. They are given everything they need. They're given transportation, they're given new identities, and they are just simply told that they are ready to go, and they are given a mission, essentially. Not really asked if they want to take the mission, just given the mission. And the mission is to find the location of where the former campers are being held, which they believe is in a lab. So they need to find the door to that lab, which they haven't been able to find. They need to find the door. They need to confirm that it's the lab. Like, they need to actually go into it to see if the kids are there. And then they need to send word to Miss Angelique, who is the A. They later find out. They need to send word to her to let her know the exact location, so that they can come and basically FBI it up almost, get the ringleaders together and all that. And they all have names and things like that, but I'm not going to go into too much detail because I'm not 100% sure how many characters and things I'm going to move over when I reboot the game. But it's good to know that there are several characters that are pretty integral to the plot that are NPCs. So that's their mission, and they don't really accept it, but they are given it, and they do make their way back to camp. In between going to camp and meeting each other, they get, I think I gave them like 1 day or 1.5 days or something like that to just explore the outside world. So in Happy Camper, the camps you can only access through a interdimensional portal. They're, according to everyone that is in the world, there's no other way to access the camps. So the outside world is the actual world, which I called Hypharon. This world has, regular kind of life, people and taverns and beautiful places to go visit, and food shops and bookstores and things like that. So they are currently in a city called West Winifred that is on a continent that they needed to meet so that they could go to the camp, and they get to stay there for a day and a half. This is obviously a mechanic so that they get to learn the outside world and gain some level of permanence and attachment to the people and the world outside, so that they want to come back. It's implied that this is clearly going to be very dangerous, So you want to be as careful as possible while you're trying to, you know, fulfill your mission so that you can leave that world and come back. So that's kind of one of the reasons. And one of the things that they are able to do is they are able to, you know, gather some important things that they could, you know, figure out mysteries of at different locations. They're able to experience something that is only on like this continent that's very beautiful and mystical. They're able to get a little bit of lore. And then they are also able to meet people, you know, and hopefully gain some level of comfort and friendship with them. And lucky for me, that's what they did. They became very good friends with a satyr that owned a tavern, who was, I played her as a very like motherly, loving, you know, almost over exuberant type of like bar maiden type of woman. And I did that because she's very much the exact opposite of almost all of the other adults. And so of course they really bonded really, and I think they only were there for like 2 nights or something like that, 2 nights in a day and a half or something like that. And they bonded so much with this person, which was super cute. So that's what they did in between the little bit of time they had before they had to go to camp. And then they went to camp. On their way to camp, even though they have to go through a portal, they got on the ship, and the whole ship actually went through a portal. And that's the kind of the transportation they took. But so on the ship, they meet other counselors. And so all of those counselors and our players, they all meet each other on the ship, and then they arrive through a portal to the edge or the shores of Klein's camp. This is where a kind of adventure really begins for them. And this is also where the horror begins in this iteration of how I did this story. In the first season, I began the horror trope essentially, kind of right out of the gate, while they were in the real world, or while they were on the outside world. And I did that through nightmares. They seemed to really enjoy that in the first game, and I wanted to bring that back. But one of the things that I noticed in the first game is that players weren't really given a lot of time to interact with the normalcies, their parents. I think one person had like a grandparent and things like that. Like I gave them a little bit of time, but they didn't get like a day and a half. They got like a couple of hours, and then they all went to camp. And so I didn't feel like they had enough connection to the people and even the place really before they went to camp. And so I wanted to kind of up that for the second season, but that meant that I had to really just let them explore the world, like explore where they were for a while, to like really gain that type of relationship naturally, which means I didn't interject really much horror. I had a couple of scenes that were going to be like horror fight scenes or something like that, but we didn't end up getting to those. So this is the first time, like in the first two sessions, this is probably the first time I realized that the way I had built the game and the way I wanted the game to actually run was going to be too short. So this is going to be 8 sessions. The last game was only supposed to be, I think, for like 3 or 4 sessions, and that turned into 7 sessions. This game was supposed to be 8 sessions, and I could already see that it was going to be longer, but unfortunately, unlike the last game, I could allow that to go longer, but this one I had other responsibilities. I had another game coming up, so I couldn't extend it. So I was like, oh. So I had to make a lot of sacrifices kind of early on of like some of the stuff I was planning to do, because I was like, whoops, too short. But that's okay. It happens sometimes. So they get to the camp and shenanigans ensue. Bunch of stuff happens, and I'm just going to give like a general rundown, but they essentially get to like a camp lodge. So this summer camp is essentially kind of based off of a Girl Scout summer camp. If you have any like idea of what that kind of looks like, it's usually some sort of like a lodge where people go and eat meals, and that is usually somewhere like in the center, or there's usually a map that shows you where everything is, but that's usually in the center or at the back of the camp. There's usually like a lake, or somewhere they can do like water sports, and then there's like a space where they can do like camping or hiking and things like that. And then there are the actual camps where people sleep, and there's sometimes cabins, sometimes they're tents, it depends. So that's kind of what it looks like, and that's kind of the layout. In the first season, they spent the majority of their time exploring the entire camp, because that was the only location. They were home for like a prequel for like a half a day and a night, and that night they had a bunch of nightmares. So not the greatest night. And then they went to camp, and they were at camp for 7 days. So they could really explore all of the camp. In this season, they were in the outside world for, I want to say like a couple of weeks, like technically in like the story. And then we played like 2.5 days or 3 days or something like that. And then they went to camp. And then camp hasn't started yet. So they're counselors now. So they are prepping for the camp to begin. So there's no campers here yet. And was that a mistake? I went back and forth on if I should just have them be campers and have a bit of a different storyline, or if I should just have them be counselors. But I kind of wanted to see what the differences would be. I wanted to, because they had already been counselors in the campers in the first season. So I kind of wanted to see if I could expand certain things more if they were counselors. Now looking back on it, I think one of the biggest things I would change is for them to go back to being campers. I think the world that I built around the campers in the first season, which was much more grounded than the world that I built around them being counselors, and kind of doing like a mission thing. But again, I was trying to make that a lot more open world adventure than the like smaller open world horror adventure of Happy Camper season 1, which I actually think I prefer. So that was just my takeaway as I was playing this game. So a whole bunch of things ensue while they're there. They find, there's a whole building, the lodge. There's a whole building for them to explore. There's and then they can leave and go to like the camps, but that all happens in like a short amount of time. So because it's only 8 sessions. So even though I opened the world a lot more so they could go to a lot more places, the sessions obviously they were just going to be too short for all of the stuff that was available. So a whole bunch of stuff happened while I were at camp before camp even starts. A couple of things that I added to the game, because this is already a homebrew game, but another thing I added to the game was the concept of these furs. That's FIR. And I really enjoyed that addition. I think I'm going to keep that. But another thing I added was, so the fur is kind of a monster. Yeah, it's a monster. It's technically a monster. Another thing I added was a type of familiar that's not really a familiar. It was I don't even know how to explain it. I basically made a person like reincarnate into a familiar, kind of. That just kind of came out of my head one day, and I was just kind of like, that sounds cool. I'll make that work. And it was really cool. So I think I'm also going to keep that idea moving forward, but I need to make some rules up for that to figure out like when that happens. And that's all, of course, related to this creature that I also created called the fur, and the different types of furs. So long story short, a lot of things happen. They go on a lot of different like small adventures until they eventually find themselves where they need to be, which is figuring out how to get into the lab. So finding the door, figuring out how to activate the key to get into the door, and then also figuring out what's going on with like the staff and the other counselors and stuff like that. So that is essentially the end of the season, is that they find the lab, they go down to the lab, and then I was like, well, let's make this a battle and see if anyone survives. That'll be fun. And yeah, they literally defeated all my people. So that's great for them. I'm still in shock about that battle, to be honest. I was like, what is happening? I think I threw 7. So the enemy at the end is the staff. So the adults, the staff that work there, that come in to run the camp, and the camp director, whose name is Mrs. Reyes. All of them are the bad guys. So I think I had like 5, so full-grown adults with practiced, skills and magic and whatnot. And then Mrs. Reyes was like the boss. And they all come out of this portal and ambush my players. Well, I only have 4 players. And they all come out of this portal, ambush my players all at once in an enclosed area, which is the underground lab. So you can imagine my surprise as they're just steamrolling. They're just steamrolling. Oh, so that was a fun time. That was probably one of my favorite one of my favorite battles. Yeah, so that happened. They all survived. They all survived and thrived, to be honest. They actually captured everyone. That. I was actually trying to get at least Mrs. Reyes to like run back through the portal. That didn't even happen. Oh goodness. So again, long story short, that battle was done, and then they were able to give word to Miss Angelique, aka A, and she was able to come and clean up everything, close the camp right before new campers arrived. I think they were on the island. So Happy Camper, this camp is on a enclosed island, and I believe they were there for like 4 days. I think like 4 days and 5 nights, I believe, until they got to like the final battle and finished that up. So that was Happy Camper season 2. Still very, very fun. I think it lost a lot of the horror aspects that I was able to do in the first game, because I wanted to sacrifice that so that they could do more adventure-y stuff, because I did kind of feel like the first season was Call of Cthulhu with like a touch of 5e. And so I was trying to make this one more 5e with horror. But I actually think the first season I did that balance better. So that is Happy Camper. That was 8 sessions. So that was like 8 or 9 weeks or something like that. We did a session 0, and then we just did like what I call the aftermath, which is essentially a debrief where I get like feedback, and then we do like an epilogue. And in the epilogue, each character gets to kind of ask me questions about like what they found, what they didn't find, the different things that their characters would be doing for the rest of their lives, as these characters are not going to be coming back as like player characters. And I made notes just in case I wanted to do like, a little fun little cameo, because they're all alive. So we'll see if I do that. And then we did kind of like a feedback session. So all of the stuff that I kind of talked about throughout this talk was also discussed in the feedback. And I completely agreed that, particularly for the person that came from the first season to the second season, I like that they were able to see kind of the differences and let me know which ones they actually liked it or preferred. And then obviously I'm always looking to like grow and improve. And so I really enjoy when players are like, love the game, it was really fun. I would love more of this. Some of this, you know, I feel like this was missing in this area. That way I can always improve. So that's what we did the other day, and Happy Camper is officially done in terms of this first like arc of Happy Camper. But it will be coming back. I just probably will be looking at really determining how I want this game to be played. Do I want it to be a 5e adventure that's just a little creepy, or do I want it to be a summer camp horror that is simply using the mechanics of 5e? And I think I'm more leaning towards the latter after doing these 2 seasons. So look out for whatever that's going to look like in the future. But when I do, you know, come back out with the new Happy Camper, it is going to be on my podcast. I think that's going to be it for me today. Thank you all so much for watching. And as always, I'll see you next time, which will be next Friday, because I do videos every Friday now. Okay. Bye.